Interesting. Five. That wasn't how that would work. Teacher.
Good afternoon. Hey, Christine, have you heard from either Laura or Holly? I see Dan is on and Brian is on.
Holly will not be joining us, but I
Oh,
have
that's right,
not heard.
Holly is absent today.
I have not heard from Laura. I can text her.
Okay.
She says she is joining us. Laura.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Should we give her a couple minutes or is she going to be a while?
She gave me the impression she's going to be right on, so
Okay.
I would just
we'll
give her
just
another minute or so. Yep.
Yep. Hold for another minute or two.
Patty,
Yes.
I am on my way to the airport. It's going to take me several hours to get there, but I may drop in and out. Just
Okay.
let me know.
Okay, thank you very much for that heads up. All right, let's get started. Is the meeting already been recorded?
Yep.
Yes, it is. It is.
Okay.
All right, so we're already in process of being recorded. So let's convene the meeting. It is 12:03 and we're convening the Vermont Community Broadband Board meeting of May 13th, 2024. Board members that are in attendance are Brian Otley, Dan Nelson, Laura Sibilia, and myself, Patty Richards. Christine, will you do roll call of staff?
Yes, we have Christina Sweet, Tony Clitheroe, Alyssa Matthews, Lucy Fortier, Tom Malinowski, Heron Herzog, and we're also joined by Clay Purvis, our federal program officer. Rob is not going to join us. He's on vacation today.
Okay, great, thank you. And just for the record, Holly is not able to join today, but all 4 other board members are in attendance. And before we go to approval of the agenda, I just wanted to note that the June meeting, the regular meeting of the Vermont Community Broadband Board for June 10th is an in-person meeting. And Christine, do you have a location already scheduled for that, or is that still in the works?
That's still in the works, but we're trying to find but worst comes to worst, we'll be in Montpelier in the Giga conference room.
Okay, and that will be still accessible by GoTo, or not, sorry, not GoToMeeting, but Teams. It'll still be accessible
Yes.
virtually. Correct?
Yep.
Okay. That will be an in-person meeting. If for anybody that can attend in person, we encourage you to do so. The other reminder I just want to make is that for our calendars, the standing meeting is the second Monday of every month. There was some confusion with calendar schedules. I just want to remind everybody that the standing meeting is the second Monday of every month unless we have a change due to a holiday or some conflict that is significant. So mark your calendars for the standing meeting rather than wait for staff to send out meeting invites. And then with that, I'm going to make a motion to approve the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Great.
Second.
Okay, I got Dan seconded first. Any discussion, changes for the agenda? I'll note one typo for item 4, Joanne Hovis. It should be CTC versus CTV, just that one typo.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Is there any other changes for the agenda? Okay, hearing none, let's call the vote. For all those in favor, please say aye.
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 4 ayes. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next on our agenda is approval of minutes, and we have 3 sets of meeting minutes going from March through April. I just want to make a comment that it was a pleasure to read the minutes. They were well-written, comprehensive, but not so comprehensive that you had to sit there and read them for, days and days and days. I just want to applaud I assume it's Tony that wrote the minutes.
Karen did
Yeah,
it.
Oh, Heron did it. Heron, exceptional job on the minutes. I just want to applaud and give recognition for that. I was really impressed with the minutes.
thank you.
Thank you. So let's take them one by one. I'll make a motion to approve the March 11th, 2024 meeting minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dan. Any discussion of the meeting minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4 to 0. Next, I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of March 25th, 2024. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Brian. Any discussion of the March 25th meeting minutes? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries 4 to 0. Next on the meeting minute approval is April 1st, 2024. To approve those minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Brian. Any discussion? Right, hearing none other than my dog bark. Please say aye.
Aye.
Those in favor,
Aye.
say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries 4 to 0. Meeting minutes have been approved. And now we'll move on to item 3, which is public comment. Christine, can you run that for us?
Yes, I can. At this time, anybody from the public can speak. Raise your hand. You'll be given 3 minutes and we'll pick you in the order that you raise your hands. So feel free to make any comments. We'll give you a few minutes. Okay, not seeing any hands raised. Going once. Going twice. Okay, we're through public comment.
Okay, thank you, Christine. The next on our agenda is item 4. Joanne Hovis from CTC will join us to give some information and overview relative to the BEAD program and digital equity. Christine, do you want to tee this up in any way?
Yep, thanks. This was an action item that was on the parking lot. Joanne has agreed to present. That she'll talk about what the process is for BEAD digital equity and how we're doing in schedules and all those kind of things. So Joanne, she has a presentation, so go ahead, where you can, screen is yours.
Great, thank you. And good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you. I'm going to share a little bit with you of my observations of what has developed in Vermont in your work in developing the BEAD and digital equity programs, with a particular focus on BEAD, given its enormous complexity and very lengthy timeline. And I'll share, just as someone who's working on these matters for more than a dozen states, where I think you are in this process and how this has all developed, as well as our observations of the way you've structured the program within the NTIA rules. And as I'm pulling up my deck, I'll just share an overview, which is that you are at the forefront of most of the states in the nation, and you'll see in a few minutes a little bit more detail about that. You're probably in the first third in terms of how advanced the work that you've done is, and how far along in the planning process you are. You also have a very strong customized process that, within the very significant constraints imposed by the federal government for the BEAD program, you have built that custom, bespoke, very Vermont-centric, Vermont-focused program, which is not a small thing to do, because the BEAD program is enormously prescriptive and restrictive as designed by the federal government, unlike any other program that we've ever seen in broadband before. And I'd like to show you the context for that and the big picture of how we got here and what our observations of your program design are. And I'm going to emphasize program design in particular because of those federal constraints that I just described. The key to a successful BEAD program is going to be a very careful, methodical, process-driven approach that is adhered to very closely. This is entirely unlike other grant programs, including those funded by the federal government, where there were relatively few restrictions. So let me give you an example. The Capital Projects Fund that was administered by the Department of the Treasury. In the American Rescue Plan Act, the Capital Projects Fund program has only a small number of provisions as to what the federal role will be or federal requirements will be. And the Department of the Treasury has, as a result of that, been very open to state-level flexibility and structures and state-level priorities and goals within a larger federal framework. BEAD is entirely different in that it materialized not in the context of an emergency recovery bill dealing with the pandemic and the economic consequences of the pandemic. BEAD materialized in the context of an infrastructure bill. It's part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And as a result, there is considerable federal focus written by Congress and built into the statute with regard to how the program should be structured, what the planning cycle will look like, what the deadlines will look like, what the federal priorities are from a policy standpoint that will be required of the states by the federal oversight entity, which in this case is NTIA within the Department of Commerce. Those are two very different approaches. And as a result, I think that you, like other states, have spent a good portion of the past year trying to design a program that fits within those BEAD frameworks of much more federal prescriptiveness, and in our opinion have done so quite successfully. You've built a very strong program that is very faithful to the concepts and the goals and the values that animated the CUD program, for example, and other elements of Vermont policy. So that's a kind of starting point for a framework of our observations of what you have designed so far and why we think you've built something quite considerably strong, but like every other state, also very complex. One more point, and then I will pull up my deck and show you what I mean in some detail. The other point I wanted to share is that I have looked at some of the content in your various plans of the past year about the level of stakeholder engagement, and it's another area where I would commend you and your team within the VCBB, because the degree of consultation is as extensive on a proportional basis as we've seen in any state anywhere in the country. And that, in my opinion, as someone who has worked for local government primarily on matters of internet and broadband since the advent of the commercial internet in the 1990s, that local consultation and that outreach to local communities and other stakeholders is the absolute necessary prerequisite for a successful program. That has clearly been undertaken here, and the program really reflects it. The design of the program reflects that entirely. So with all of that as an introduction, let me share with you our observations of what you've developed and why we think it's really optimized for a Vermont environment. So I'm hoping that you are able to see my my screen now. And I see Christine nodding, so I'm going to assume that is the case.
Yep.
And terrific, thank you. What I did here is I primarily focused on graphics because the BEAD program is so complex, and I know you all have the many hundreds of pages that have been written by your team for the 5-year action plan, the initial proposal volume 1, the initial proposal volume 2, and then of course the digital equity plan. And these things all fit together quite intimately and intricately. But I focused on graphics so that I'm not just showing you more words. And I started by focusing on NTIA graphics, in part because I think a key part of the insight to BEAD is the point I made a few minutes ago about the degree to which this is a program for which there are significant constraints imposed on the states by federal policy. I don't know if Congress intended that when it wrote the statute. I don't know if it intended that there would be quite as activist a role for a federal agency in overseeing the states, but that is effectively how it played out. And it probably does align with a lot of what Congress wanted, which was to determine the core framework of how the program would be run. But one of the critical elements to understand as we look at how the program has been designed by the federal government is the various elements that are not within the discretion of any state, not Vermont and not any other state. One of these areas is technology prioritization. And what you see here is an NTIA graphic of how the federal government is thinking about how these funds should be expended. First and primary use of the funds is to reach unserved and underserved locations that with what the federal government calls priority broadband, meaning fiber optics. End-to-end fiber, 100% fiber, is supposed to be the priority use of the funds, and wherever the budget allows for it, you are obligated under the federal rules. You and every other state are obligated under the federal rules to fund fiber. Where the budget does not allow for it, and I'll show you in a few minutes quite a bit of detail on how you determine that, but where the budget doesn't allow for it, you can use something that the federal government calls RBS, or reliable broadband service. And reliable broadband service is not end-to-end fiber, but it's second tier. Hybrid fiber coaxial infrastructure, that is what the cable companies primarily use. Digital subscriber line, or DSL, which is what phone companies have traditionally used, so long as it delivers the necessary and requisite speeds for reliable broadband service, which is 100 by 20, and licensed fixed wireless. And then only in the event that you have locations where there is no conceivable way that you can find a solution based on a competitive grant process to deliver reliable broadband service, priority broadband, which is fiber, or reliable broadband service, non-priority qualifying broadband, that is HFC, DSL, and licensed fixed wireless, only in the event you can't deliver any of those, can you then turn to non-reliable services, effectively unlicensed fixed wireless and low Earth orbit satellite. And that's the hierarchy the federal government has set up and the requirement they have put on the states to design the program with that kind of prioritization in mind. What this looks like for NTIA is that there is a set of protocols that they have asked states to, or they've required states to adhere to in designing their BEAD grant programs. Now, this did not apply to any other grant program. Capital projects, this is not an issue. If you're using state funds, it is not an issue. This is only for BEAD. And the way NTIA thinks about this, and this is NTIA's own graphic describing the selection protocol. In a few minutes, I'll show you what this looks like in Vermont based on the design you have done. But the way NTIA thinks about it is, if you look over here on the left at the top, the bids come in, and they might be for end-to-end fiber, they might be for hybrid fiber coax, they could be for all kinds of technologies. You can solicit them all at the same time. But what you have to do is first you look at, are there priority bids? And you will recall that their definition of priority was end-to-end fiber. If there are priority bids for a given area, you are then required to ask, is the cost below? There's something that the NTIA calls the extremely high cost per location threshold. And you'll see that acronym a lot. You'll see EHCPLT. It's the least elegant bit of jargon in the history of broadband, which is saying a lot. But what it really means is the budget. Is the cost that you've been proposed by this bidder within your overall statewide budget? And if it is, yes, you are obligated to take the highest scoring end-to-end fiber proposal and fund it, so long as it's within your budget. If you have multiple proposals, you can score them. The top scoring one, if it's within your budget, you have to fund it. You don't have an option. If it's not, you can try to negotiate it down, or you can then look at alternative technologies. If you don't have any end-to-end fiber bids that are within your budget, you can look at those other types of technologies and determine whether they are within your budget. If they are, you have to fund that application. If not, and only then, if you got no applications for either fiber or those alternative reliable technologies that were within your budget, only then can you go to unlicensed fixed wireless or low Earth orbit satellite. Now, what is this concept of budget and why is it so important? And I'm going to use the term budget instead of extremely high cost per location threshold. The reason it is so important is the other critical factor that is so prescriptive about the federal framework is that Congress wrote into the statute that every state is obligated to get to 100% of eligible locations with these funds. 100%. So there is no way to do this in the way that we have for 2 decades done broadband grant programs at the state level and frankly at the federal level, at the FCC, at NTIA, at USDA. The approach has always been, we've got a bucket of funds, we're going to solicit applications, we're going to fund the best applications until we run out of money, and then we'll wait for the next appropriation. In the case of BEAD, it is not that way. You can't just fund whatever applications come in until you run out of money. You have to make sure that the funds will extend to 100% of locations, which is why you may have to go to alternative technologies rather than fiber if the proposed costs are above the overall budget. So when we say, is the cost within budget, what we mean is the budget on a statewide basis. Given the number of dollars available to the state, can the state afford to fund that particular grant area based on this application, or is it just too expensive because it would leave insufficient funds to fund the rest of the state? And that is an enormous complexity of the BEAD program that has literally never existed before. We have never had a requirement to get to 100% in any broadband funding program. And for that reason, the design of this program in Vermont, but in every other state, is constrained, and one might also say, I suppose, empowered and inspired by the requirement to get to 100%, but it is that critical factor. And it frankly means that in every single state and territory, we are doing something that's never been done before and designing a program in a new way, knowing that this has not been done and we don't have precedents that are easy to point to for how to do it. That's an exciting charge, but it's also an enormous charge. So here's the federal framework for what is required of all of the states. And every state has spent the past year looking at this framework and trying to figure out, given our priorities, our goals, our needs, how are we going to work within this framework and develop something that is optimized to succeed in our state. The way you have done it in Vermont, I just want to commend you on, because not having been involved in any way in designing your initial proposal, I have reviewed it and analyzed it and think that it is a very creative and thoughtful way to try to address what Congress and NTIA have charged you with. And just by way of background, so you have a sense of how I approach this, I will share that since the bipartisan infrastructure law passed, I have spent almost all of my professional hours and quite a few of my non-professional and nighttime hours trying to figure out how are we going to accomplish this. The design of the BEAD program is the single largest intellectual and professional challenge I have encountered in my career. It is also the most important, with the greatest number of consequences. And I and my team designed the programs like this in many other states. So for what that is worth, I just want to share that I have quite a bit of experience in this. And I think that what you have designed is very thoughtful, very rigorous, and very appropriate to the goals and the policies and the values as I understand them in Vermont. So let me describe for you what I have observed of the Vermont program as it is written out in your initial proposal, Volume 2. The first thing is that you have made a determination that the state is going to design the project areas rather than letting the companies design those areas. This is another way in which BEAD is very different for most states than any grant program that has come before, because for most grant programs, the states have allowed the applicants to just identify where they want to serve. For BEAD purposes, because of the requirement to get to 100% of eligible locations, it's going to be much more chaotic to allow the companies to determine where they want to serve. It really invites cherry picking. So what has been determined in Vermont, I think, is a very elegant solution to what the project areas will be, which is, of course, first and foremost, that the project areas will be the CUDs. And wherever there is not a CUD present, it will be the set of municipal boundaries. And then your team in Vermont designed, I think, a very innovative approach to making sure that they have as much data and information as possible from the relevant applicants, which is to invite something that they've called pre-proposals, which is effectively asking the potential applicants to comment on these project areas, to comment on their economic viability and their technical viability, so that if there is a need to tweak these project area boundaries at all, there will be information that is available. And based on data and input and judgment, there will be an opportunity to customize the boundaries. So the process is, if there are no proposed changes, then the areas will just be finalized. If there are proposed changes and it appears that those changes will optimize to make the dollars go as far as possible and result in the best possible outcome for Vermonters, then there is the potential to tweak those boundaries. And I think that is a really creative combination of using existing and important municipal and CUD boundaries, and then also customize them for purposes of the BEAD program. So that's step one, really, is determining what the project areas are. Now it starts to get complicated. And when I say that, I want you to know what you're about to see is actually considerably simpler than what has been developed in other states, particularly out in the West. This is going to be very complicated because in Western states, the BEAD allocation formula was so disadvantageous that they are getting a small fraction in many cases of the number of dollars they need in order to address the full challenge and get to 100%. Fortunately, for many states in the East, they are somewhat better off, and that is true of Vermont as well. You will hopefully have sufficient funds. But that said, for all that, this was that NTIA framework that I explained to you a few minutes ago. Let me show you what it looks like when you try to figure out in actual practice and the reality of receiving, scoring, analyzing, negotiating. What is this really going to look like in Vermont? And it's going to look something like this. Let me share now what this means. You'll recall that in the NTIA framework, we have to start out with fiber as the first priority and only move on to alternative technologies following the exhaustion of fiber given the available budget. So what we're calling in our analysis of your structure, what we're calling phase one for priority is priority fiber projects, moving on then to phase two for non-fiber, and only in the event that neither phase one nor phase two options will address 100% of eligible locations, would you then move on to phase three. Now, here's what the process looks like as designed in your initial proposal, volume 2. And I'm going to go through this just at a high level and somewhat briefly, because I know you all have those documents and you have seen them and know what the content is. But I think it's worth sharing because the logic of the process as it has been designed is really considerable and very important to understand for what is going to happen in the current year and the scale of the task that your team will have on its hands going forward. So the way the program is designed is, as you'll recall, there will be project areas determined, and the project area boundaries will be provided to all the potential applicants while they are preparing their proposals or their applications. Their applications will be received in phase one, all of the applications for all different technologies, but based on the prioritization in the federal statute, the fiber applications have to be prioritized first. So they'll be received, they'll be scored, and then they'll be placed in order of the score. So the highest scoring applications for the project area, assuming you have more than one by project area, will effectively be ranked. The one that is highest scoring, and I'm hoping you can see my cursor here on the screen, the highest scoring will then be looked at, and the question will be asked, is the amount that the applicant is asking within your budget? If they are within the budget and they are the highest scoring fiber application under NTIA's rules, you will preliminarily assign them. You will effectively put them aside and say, that's what we've got to fund because they're fiber and they're the highest scoring for this grant area. If they're not within the budget, the way the program has been conceived is the highest scoring application will then have the opportunity to bring their score down, bring their cost down to below the budget that you have available. And this will be something that your staff will lead in negotiations with them. If they can't come down in price, to a point where they are within your overall statewide budget, given everything you know about how much money you'll need for all the other areas, the application would be removed from consideration. And if there is a second highest scoring application for that area, you would then go through the same process with them. And you've got a sort of a round of opportunities there in order of score, taking the highest scoring. Are they within budget? If yes, they get funded. If no, they get a chance to negotiate before they get removed from consideration and the next highest scoring application be considered. Now, we don't know that there will be more than one application in some areas, and most states know that. There will be areas that may not get more than one application. So your structure allows you, after this round of consideration, if there's only one application or no applications, or even if there are multiple applications, if none are within budget, you have some alternative strategies that you can then choose to use if the opportunity seems right at the time, is to solicit new proposals from entities who have bid in adjacent areas or from other providers in those areas, or potentially to remove some of the locations from the project area, reducing down to unserved only, in order to see if you can get to a price that is within your budget by reducing the number of locations. You cannot go below unserved. You have to get to all unserved under the statute, but you could try to see if you could get a lower price as a last resort among your fiber applicants, if necessary, if it appears that you don't have the option of doing all fiber for unserved and underserved. And then you also have the option of running a second round application process in the event that you need to. What I will just share with you here as an insight, I know it seems like a very laborious and complex process, but I think the strategy is incredibly sound, because what you have is a very clear and fair process that will be applied equitably and evenly to every entity. It's a transparent process. It's open. It is not something that should create any risk of anyone feeling that they did not have the same opportunity and the same shot as any other applicant. And the flexibility that comes from having these additional options here allows you to, in the event that you don't have an optimal option in that first part of the process, then use some of these backup negotiation options to try to get to the best possible outcome. It's very strategic in that way, and while it may not seem this way, it is actually streamlined relative to what we see other states doing, at the same time as it creates a good amount of rigor and a good amount of opportunity for your applicants. So that's how you go through the process with regard to just your fiber applications. If you go through all of this and there are still grant areas or grant locations that have been removed, perhaps from grant areas, that still require additional options, and it is clear that end-to-end fiber, you're simply not going to get proposals that are within your budget, at that point, you would move on to reliable broadband service, right? That is hybrid fiber coaxial, fast speed DSL, and licensed fixed wireless. And the process for evaluating those applications is the same as the one we just described for fiber. You will have all those applications, you will score them, you will put them in order of highest scoring by grant area, consider whether the highest scoring is within your budget. If yes, it gets assigned. If no, it gets a chance to negotiate. And if it's still no, then you move on to the next application. And continue to do so until you hopefully have a solution for every grant area and every eligible location in the state. If not, you have these additional negotiation strategies that you can utilize. You have the flexibility to try to use these additional approaches. And it's only in the event that you have any locations where there's simply no option whatsoever that you then can move on to non-reliable broadband service, which NTIA has defined as unlicensed fixed wireless and low Earth orbit satellite, with the goal of retaining some budget for these remaining locations such that you can afford to fund those locations for one of these two technologies, getting you to that 100% goal. Obviously, every state is hoping that it will, in this first phase of dealing with fiber applications, be able to find an optimized solution for every eligible location in the state. But the reality is that many states will have to move on to this phase 2 reliable broadband service and perhaps even phase 3 non-reliable broadband service. But your process is really designed and crafted to make sure that this is a last resort and that you are going to try everything possible to get the best possible solution for each location. I should add one more quick set of insights about our observation of your initial proposal, volume 2, and what we thought was really very impressive about it is the integration of digital equity into the BEAD program. And I know that you have a completely separate and very robust digital equity strategy and digital equity plan, as well as an emerging digital equity capacity grant application for NTIA. But the digital equity goals and values are really infused into BEAD as well, which is important because, quite frankly, the amount of funding that NTIA is able to make available to most states, particularly smaller states, of digital equity funds is pretty marginal. It will be meaningful and it will make a difference, but it's not going to be dozens of years of funding, nor will it cover every need or every potential program. So building digital equity into BEAD was particularly important. And where we see this is in two critical ways, among others. But first, there is a low-income service offering that BEAD awardees will be required to offer to eligible households. The definition of eligibility based on the federal rules currently, by the way, is 200% of the federal poverty level. So the same as the Affordable Connectivity Program, and using that metric for eligibility. And what is in your current draft of the initial proposal, volume 2, is that awardees will have to commit to offering $45 per month services to households who qualify under that 200% of federal poverty level. The companies will have an option if they can demonstrate that this would put at risk their business viability. They will have an option of requesting a waiver and justifying that waiver alternative, but they still will not be able to go above $75 per month for service, even if they receive the waiver. So a low-cost service offering for the life of the infrastructure, a very powerful tool here. The second one is that the scoring for the applications includes consideration of digital equity in a number of different ways, but among them and most significantly is there's a scoring criterion for the affordability of a gigabit product for fiber applications. And for non-fiber, by the way, it's the affordability of 100 by 20 service, because non-fiber networks will struggle to get to a gigabit reliably. So a different metric for service there, but the same consideration of affordability and commitments to offering affordable pricing is built into the scoring. And then community support is built into the scoring as well, where the communities can include digital equity among the considerations as they consider whether to offer letters of support. I think I should pause there because that's an awful lot of content. I hope that my overall observations and summary were not just repetitive of things you already know, and that I've been able to share how I see your program design and structure fitting in nationally. I should probably conclude by telling you that I think the work of the next year to 18 months is unlike anything we have experienced in public broadband before. There will be an enormous amount of effort necessary to undertake the program that I just described, to do it rigorously, to do it with sufficient data and analytics, to optimize because of the complexity, and most importantly, to do it as it was designed, which is to be fair, open, and equitable, not just to the applicants, but also to the Vermont households and businesses and institutions that are supposed to be the ultimate beneficiaries of the program. But I think that you have designed and adopted a program that really is very carefully and strategically crafted to maximize the value of the BEAD dollars. And the execution obviously will be the proof of all of that, but the design portion and the planning portion of your efforts have been extremely robust and rigorous. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. That was really helpful. What we'll do is take some questions, do some Q&A with board members. I'll start out, but encourage other board members to hop in. You had mentioned, obviously, the goal of BEAD is to go for end-to-end with fiber. And then phase 2 would be other reliable broadband service. Is there a speed requirement with the reliable broadband service that's non-fiber? Does the speed requirement stay the same?
Yes, it's 100 by 20, and it does. So I need to refresh myself on the details of this, but I think it is the same requirement. It's a showing that can be done in a reliable and robust way throughout. So if I'm not the engineer on the team, but my recollection of the notice of funding opportunity from NTIA was that the network would need to show that it can deliver that speed 80% of the time to 80% of the premises that are supposed to be covered. In a fiber context, that is sort of a given. That's really easy. Okay. With off-the-shelf technologies for fiber, you can get to a symmetrical gigabit to 100% of locations, so long as you have sufficient back-end connectivity through the middle mile. It is more complex with reliable broadband services, as they're called by NTIA, non-priority. That would be particularly licensed fixed wireless. So there will be a need to verify in the applications that the design of those networks is sufficient to meet those technical requirements. And that's all built into the way your program has been designed and into the scoring to make sure that the companies that are proposing non-fiber technologies are demonstrating that it can meet the technical requirements.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And then a follow-up question to kind of this tiered bidding process for these areas that are unserved and underserved. What happens in the event that nobody bids on them? Nobody wants to pick them up. You know, it's kind of the worst of the worst. Is there a provider of last resort? Like, what happens to the straggler ends?
So, NTIA's answer to that has been that that's when you can turn to non-reliable broadband service in their definition. That is to say, the technologies that they have said really, even if they're present currently, those locations are not considered served for your map. And the technologies that they are referring to are unlicensed fixed wireless and satellite. As a practical matter, there are going to be places, and I can't speak so much for Vermont. I'm hoping you won't have many of these. You may have straggler locations, but certainly in the western part of the country, there will be large areas where there is simply no bidder who can make the business case work. even with a 100% federal grant, they would need an ongoing operating subsidy to want to do this, and the economics of that are obviously not attractive. So the practical reality is those locations are likely to be assigned to satellite, and then there will be some kind of arrangement made with a low Earth orbit satellite company. That is not, however, an easy last resort, because there are some places where satellite service won't be great. And we also don't have a competitive environment for low Earth orbit satellite right now. That is hopefully going to emerge in the next few years. But the reality is right now there's really only one network of that sort. NTIA has not provided a lot of guidance about how they see that happening and what the terms are and what the relationship between the states and Starlink, which is part of SpaceX, and that is the only LEO satellite network that currently can deliver this. We don't know exactly what it looks like yet. I am hoping that we will have guidance from the federal government in coming months. But quite frankly, that is likely to be the last resort in many places where there's simply not an alternative. Now, I will say that built into your process is the option for the VCBB staff, to go and negotiate, to go to adjoining areas and existing providers or bidders for adjoining areas, and to try to negotiate deals where areas perhaps get bundled together, or options are expanded, or there are other kinds of inducements built in to try to get a solution there, so that satellite option is truly the last resort. But as I said before, we've never done this before. We've never had a 100% requirement. So nobody's quite sure yet just how much we will be going to those last resort options.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Other board members have questions? Christine?
Yeah, one of the things I know that maybe you can talk to, Joanne, is, you know, we've certainly been frustrated staff, and I'm sure the board has as well, is the tight schedules and the demands that the NTIA have placed on us in terms of deadlines. And just speak to that, especially that and the curing process.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I am, let me just share with you all on the board the enormous lift that this program has really represented for every state broadband office in the country. It was not only a very extensive planning cycle with hundreds and hundreds of pages of content developed under a very prescriptive federal set of outlines for the programs, but NTIA has also never done anything like this before, and they have been working very hard and doing their best, but also learning in real time. And as a result, what your staff and the staff of every broadband office has been dealing with is this enormous effort, all the appropriate levels of outreach and engagement, all of the analytics, the design, the writing, and the fact that the federal rules are sometimes changing in real time. New federal guidance appearing as the federal government is becoming more sophisticated in its thinking, and that makes this job very hard. There's also a very clear and prescriptive set of deadlines. Those deadlines tend to focus on the states. So we know we have statutory deadlines for when certain documents are due, and then we have regulatory and rules-based deadlines coming from NTIA around turning things around. There's not a set of deadlines on them. So it's very hard for broadband offices to predict when things might be returned to them. And then frequently when they're returned, it's a request for a 3-day turnaround. So there's a set of challenges around working on these things, given the scale and scope of what NTIA is dealing with 56 states and territories. I think this is going to get more intense over the coming year, because the big picture on this is that from the time your initial proposal, volume 2, is approved, you have 365 days to get to the point that you submit a final proposal to NTIA saying, this is who we want to fund and this is how we want to fund them and so on. By the way, that is going to require NTIA approval. At the end of the day, the final decision-making here is not in the hands of the states. It's in the hands of the federal government. And they will look at what you did and your process and the fairness of the process. And did you adhere to your own program design as reflected in initial proposal volume 2, et cetera. They very significant oversight and intervention by the federal government. But for all that a year sounds like a long period of time, given the scale of what needs to happen here to get to 100%, with the challenge process and the entire grant process and what might be multiple rounds of applications, we are always cognizant of the fact that the timelines are very short and there are multiple federal approvals necessary. So, I will just share here that from the beginning of the program through here and certainly looking forward, the timeline is dictated by federal policymakers, not really by state staff, and they are working with a challenging set of circumstances that are nobody's fault. It's just that what we're doing is so novel, so monumental, it involves so much money, and the consequences are so enormous that I think there's a very large federal bureaucracy that's very prescriptive overseeing all of this, and every state broadband office is doing its best to be responsive, but frequently with very fast turnarounds, very challenging deadlines and timelines, and not a lot of visibility into the federal process, which is the necessary prerequisite for almost everything the state does.
Yeah, and any advice you can give us as the board, we're going into the digital equity capacity grant approval next. So if you've got any advice there, certainly appreciate it.
You have a really robust digital equity plan and set of programs. I think you're at a real advantage relative to some states because there's such a clear vision for digital equity in Vermont and such a clear set of priorities and values that there's not a lot of uncertainty around that. I think the one thing I would say about the Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program is that, as with much that has to do with the funding that came out of the bipartisan infrastructure law, it is again extremely prescriptive on the federal side, and there's an awful lot of overhead built into it. As you all probably already know, the allocation of funds is not enormous. It's, in the singles or tens of millions, not larger than that for most states. Only the very large states got really considerable appropriations under the allocation formula. And then it's divided into 3 tranches. So you get 50% in the first year, and I know that's the application you're considering now, and then have the potential to apply for another 25% next year, another 25% the following year. If you think about what that means for your staff, they will be writing 3 grant applications. They will be curing on 3 grant applications. And we've frequently seen 7, 8, 9 rounds of curing for digital equity plans, for example. Then they will be administering 3 different programs. They will be reporting on 3 different programs. They will be going through the compliance effort on 3 different programs. I'm not quite sure why the Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program got organized that way, but it's a very heavy administrative lift. And it's not an enormous amount of money. So most states are looking for ways to administer these funds without adding a whole lot of additional local bureaucracy and overhead. And I think that's what you are designing to and trying to optimize for. But it's more funding than we've ever had for digital equity before. So we are, I think, very grateful, as a community of practice that Congress has funded this, but it comes with a whole lot of overhead and bureaucracy. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it changes the scope of what is doable at the local level.
Okay, any other questions or comments from the board or Christine? Anybody on staff that has a question that they'd like to pose?
Anybody else from staff? Thank you, Joanne. That was very helpful.
Yes, very
Go
good
ahead,
briefing. Thank
Joanne,
you.
I'll follow. Go ahead, Dan.
I was just thanking Joanne. It was a good briefing. Thank you.
Yeah, very good briefing indeed. Joanne, one follow-up question. We are working on developing and passing policies relative to ARPA funds that we have. And there's been some questions about how those policies can and can't fit the BEAD process. I don't know, could you jump in here and give us some thoughts from your perspective on any policies we develop as a board relative to ARPA? How they would be woven in with BEAD, with a BEAD process. Is it doable? In just some commentary on that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think this is also something that I'm seeing come up in most states. The rules for BEAD are so different to ARPA and so much more prescriptive. There's a much heavier federal hand on BEAD than there is on ARPA in absolutely every way, that I would just encourage you, as I have other states, to look at anything that you've done for ARPA that you'd like to have apply to BEAD and ask your legal counsel and staff to analyze whether it fits into a BEAD context or not. In many cases, it probably will not, because the federal government has been so prescriptive about BEAD. And let me just give you a handful of examples, not knowing exactly which ARPA policies you're talking about, but to just give you a sense of how prescriptive BEAD is. 75% of the scoring for BEAD was predetermined by the federal government, not by the states. You had no choice but to use the 3 primary scoring criteria under the federal framework, and that they had to add up to no less than 75% of your scoring. That would be inconceivable in an ARPA environment. In an ARPA context, you had almost complete discretion over the scoring to use your own experience and your own needs. With BEAD, that's not the case. And while BEAD does allow for just under 25% of the scoring to be determined by the states, no single state determined scoring criterion could be equal to or greater than in weight any single one of the federal 3 primary scoring criteria. So the 75% had to be, each one had to be allocated sufficiently high that it was more than any one of your secondary scoring criteria that were within your discretion. And even then, your scoring criteria, how you calculate those scores and all of that had to be approved by the federal government. And believe me, they have come back with requests for changes, some of them quite aggressive. That's an illustration of the degree of federal involvement in designing these programs. Let me give you another illustration. The competitive process. Your initial proposal, Volume 2, required a lengthy discussion of how the BEAD program would be open, fair, competitive, and transparent. Those are all good things, by the way. But in the federal definition, what that means is that you have no option but to allow any entity to apply to these programs. You can then evaluate their qualifications. They have to demonstrate qualification, they have to score well, and so on. But you don't have the option of excluding certain categories of entity from applying. You don't have the option of applying the rules differently to different kinds of categories of entity or giving additional points to entities because of the nature of what they do or who they are. And that, again, is very different to ARPA. There were ARPA programs in other states that were limited only to private for-profit entities. That's not an option with BEAD. Those states are going to have to be more inclusive. There were ARPA programs where having a local presence or having one's headquarters in that state resulted in extra points in scoring. Now, for those states in the BEAD program, they are not being allowed to do that because that would give a competitive advantage to local companies that other bidders wouldn't have. Those are the kinds of examples. I mean, it plays out differently in Vermont, but those are illustrations of how we went from a relatively flexible and open, federal policies, but not federal prescriptiveness with ARPA, to, in a BEAD context, something much, much more prescriptive. And, I said a little while ago, you developed your BEAD program within certain constraints. Another way of saying it is that there are federal handcuffs on for BEAD. So this is a lengthy way of answering your question. I'm sorry, I did it in a somewhat roundabout way, but with every ARPA-related policy, I would just recommend scrutinizing it in a BEAD context to make sure that it is BEAD appropriate, because the federal government not only is going to read every word of CURE and then hopefully soon approve your initial proposal volume 2, but they will then hold you to it. And as they frame it, if when you send in that final proposal saying, this is what we did, this is how we did it, and this is who we want to award the funds and for what purposes, they will evaluate it and they will say, did you do what you were committed to do in volume 2? We don't know what it looks like yet. We're a year off from that in almost any state, but there is that level of oversight that kind of creates this real risk for states. I think of bringing in policies from other programs that may not be BEAD appropriate. And I'm sorry to be a buzzkill on that one. It's a tough issue, and I think very difficult for states that feel that they know how to do this adequately, very well, and the federal government should not be so involved. But that is just the reality of where we are.
Thank you very much for that roundabout discussion, because that helped frame that very well, for at least for me. Really appreciate that, Joanne. Okay, any other questions at this time? Okay, hearing none, we will move along. Thank you, Joanne.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
again,
you.
Joanne.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next on our agenda, Christine, is item 5, Digital Equity State Capacity Grant.
Yep, and I will turn this over to Brittany Watson. She's certainly done a heavy lift on this, and we're very proud of the work she's done. Go ahead, Brittany.
Great. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So I'm going to review the Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program with you and our chosen approach to using the funds to implement our digital equity plan. So as a reminder, our vision for digital equity is the state of Vermont seeks to ensure every individual in Vermont, regardless of identity, community, or economic challenges, has high quality, accessible, affordable technology resources. So there are 3 programs under the Digital Equity Act. So each with a specified amount of funds that can be allocated. So I consider these programs like broken down into 3 stages of work by what they aim to achieve. So to break it down even simpler, like develop, implement, and advance. So the first program was the planning grant program, where Vermont received about $518,000 of the $60 million total funds. And that work was to develop the digital equity plan. So we wrote the plan, presented it to this board back in February, and submitted the plan to the NTIA. The NTIA has since approved Vermont's digital equity plan. So this work is complete. So we're currently in the process of applying for the capacity building program. This is where we will implement the digital equity plan. This work will begin to address digital inclusion needs. So Vermont has a tentative allocation for this grant for about 5.2 million to be used over the next 5 years. And then we have the competitive grant program, which we anticipate to receive the NOFO for this summer. So the competitive grant is to advance digital equity, engage in digital inclusion activities. So this work will hopefully bring us closer to resolving digital inclusion needs.
And Brittany, how much of that 1.25 billion would be Vermont's allocation?
Of the, oh, sorry, I'm gonna,
The competitive
That's-
grant program.
that's unknown. We're not, and actually that's not going to, we won't receive an allocation. That's going to be for, it's open for states, other local organizations, it's private sector, public sector to apply for.
Yeah, and
So
I'll
we're-
add too that. Go ahead.
I'll ask
Patty,
as a book, is it based on how many apply? So just to use a really silly bookend on this, if Vermont were the only entity to apply, we could potentially get 1.25 billion.
I'm not 100% sure on that. I think I'm not sure what their measurement will be to determine what funds get sent. So I think it's also going to depend on our scope of work or whomever is applying for those funds.
Yeah, if you remember what Joanne mentioned, that this 5.299150 was half, and then we're gonna get another 25%, another 25%. You know, that could mean 10.4 million or so. I mean, the only thing you could do is speculate to say that we'll probably get somewhat less than that, the competitive grant. But again, I think the other point that Brittany's making is really depends on the quality of those competitive grants. And we're not sure if they look at it nationwide. Alyssa's got some comments. Maybe she can help out with this answer. Alyssa, you want to add some more to this?
Yeah, I just wanted, so the digital equity capacity building is our allocation. So similar, so what Brittany and Christine were kind of saying, those are our allocations this year. And then the next 2 years, the 25% of that. The competitive program, we will not be, the state will not be directly applying for. It would be our partners or a regional collaboration that we might be able to participate in that we think might be competitive against other national projects.
Yeah, and I think that puts what's our role in that? Our role is to help our partners put together as good a competitive grant as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Brittany, sorry.
No worries. Thanks. So to go more in depth in the capacity grant, I wanted to share its purpose. So the purpose of the capacity grant is to create the conditions where individuals and communities have the information technology capacity that is needed for full participation in the society and economy of the United States. And the capacity grant has 5 main grant program requirements of Vermont. So it's to either update or maintain the digital equity plan we submitted back in February, to implement the digital equity plan that we submitted, to provide subgrants to eligible entities located within our state, evaluate the success of the subgrant program we will implement, and pay administrative costs. Vermont's programs and activities ensure that our work is focused on covered populations, are long-lasting and meaningful, can be measured for quality and impact, and is regularly informed by stakeholders with the flexibility of making changes as needed to ensure Vermonters get the best outcome for programs and activities. And all of these align with the expectations of the NTIA. So we identified 5 programs and or activities to implement the digital equity plan in a way that is meaningful, has potential to be long lasting, can be measured and flexible. Just to research, to ensure proper baseline and address the current limitations to our data. A capacity building subgrant program for local organizations representing and serving covered populations, either conducting or committed to conducting digital equity related work. Developing a regional program with neighboring states to address access to devices, developing a statewide digital navigator program, and expanding our workforce development program to include digital skills. These are Vermont's goals, and you'll see goals 2 through 5 are what we're addressing in the capacity grant programming that we're doing. So program 1, research to determine baselines and set benchmarks. We have the following objectives: improving quantitative data, identifying and implementing a centralized function for data collection and analyzation, identifying key partnerships for data collection, tracking and analysis, and increasing our learning for Vermont from improved data and digital equity indicators. So this program serves all 5 goals and impacts all covered populations. Program 2, developing a statewide digital navigator program. We have the following objectives: connect in-need Vermonters with available digital equity resources and empower them. Ensure Vermonters have access to accessible digital skilling and technical support resources. Work with other agencies to promote digital inclusion across Vermont and promote accessibility and inclusivity of digital public services. So this program serves goals 2 through 5 and impacts all covered populations. Program 3, establishing a capacity building subgrant program. We have the following objectives for this program: invest in organizations that serve and represent covered populations, promote covered population participation in digital inclusion, build competencies for digital inclusion, build a broader capacity for growth, resilience, and sustainability, and empower covered populations to perform digital inclusion tasks. So this program serves goals 2 through 5 and also impacts all covered populations. Program 4 is to expand our workforce development. So we have the following objectives for Program 4, which is to increase capacity and impact of education and training to develop talent for the digital economy, support the private sector to create sustainable jobs, and encourage the recruitment of a diverse workforce of Vermonters in the broadband and the digital economy. And this program also serves goals 2 through 5 and impacts all covered populations. And our last program is a regional program for device support, refurbishment, and deployment. So for this, we have the following objectives of ensuring every Vermont household has a connected device and assistive technology as needed, and ensure all households with an income level at or below 150% of the poverty line have access to devices. This program addresses goals 2 through 5 and impacts all covered populations. It's also worth noting this program aims to develop partnerships. Alyssa mentioned this earlier, develop partnerships with neighboring states to increase capacity for device procurement and deployment. So here's our estimated budget breakdown. We currently expect up to $4 million in additional digital equity capacity funding. That was mentioned earlier by Joanne, where we have 50% now, 25 next year, and 25% the year after that. So because personnel costs in the current grant budget should come close to covering all 5 years of the grant, we plan to request a lower percentage of personnel, travel, and supplies costs in subsequent grant budgets, which is estimated to be about 5 to 10%, with a greater percentage allocated to subawards and contracts. And here's a visual of our budget. And please note that the percentages that you see here are estimates. That would be the capacity building subgrant program taking about 20%, contractual and consulting costs at 42%, indirect costs at about 8%, and personnel, travel, and supplies at 30%. Any questions?
Okay, any questions from board members? All right, thank you very much, Brittany.
Great, thank you. So I also just want to add that the capacity grant program that we're currently working on the application and hope to complete that and submit that to the NTIA this week. So thank you.
Thank you for all your hard work on this, Brittany. Okay, anything else that you would like to cover, Christine, on?
No, I think that covers the highlight. Of course, you know, as we get into implementation, you'll be involved with those plans.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, all. Lots of work going on that front. Okay, let's move on to item 6, DV fiber construction grant amendment.
Yeah, I'll turn that to over to Alexi. You know, we've been doing a tremendous amount of work with DV fiber, where, as you saw in the packet, we as staff are going to recommend you approve this amendment, but we'll go into executive session for the board to discuss the details because the information is confidential from a competitive standpoint. But Alexi, go ahead, take it away.
Thanks. So as Christine mentioned, you know, this will be our time to talk through with the board some of the and answer some of the questions from last session. But in this instance, for DV fiber, that will all involve sensitive information. So we would seek to do that in executive session.
Yeah, and from our staff standpoint, I would recommend Christina Sweet, Tony, Alexi, and myself. And Alexi, who do you have from DV fiber?
For DV fiber, it is going to be Gabby for their executive director, and several others. I don't have the list in front of me just now. Apologies.
Alexi, do you want me to list them
I-
out? It's going to be from DV Fiber, Ford, Ann Manwaring, Stephen John, and then from GWI, it's going to be Matt Brown, Fletcher Kittredge, and Tom Sayer and Pablo Parola.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to make a motion that we move into executive session per 1 VSA section 313A1A, which protects information concerning contracts where premature general public knowledge would place the public body or person involved at a substantial disadvantage. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Dan. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor to go into executive session for DV fiber construction grant amendment, please say aye.
All right.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the ayes carry 4-0. We'll wait to move over to executive session. Thank you, everyone.
Right, and we don't have Rob here today to do that, so hopefully our staff will pick that up. I think we've divided the
Yeah,
responsibilities.
I'm
Go ahead.
moving you, but Christine and Tony, I think you need to move yourselves. Board
Okay.
members should be moved automatically, and I don't see Matt, Pablo, or one other person on the list. So if they're here and could let me know, Fletcher was the other one.
Thanks, Heron.
Yep.
Tom and I are here. This is Matt Brown. I
Okay.
just reached out to Fletcher. I think he was expecting it to be a little bit later in the schedule.
Okay.
But Pablo should be
Okay.
joining in just a moment.
Okay, and so you, all right, I'll move you. As long as you're
Yeah, I don't know
signed
how
in,
we
I
move
can
ours.
see you.
I've never had to move myself. I don't know how that works.
I'll tell you in just a minute
All
here.
right.
I don't see you on the participant list. And I think it maybe is because you are one of the creators here, but you can, let me see how you can move yourself.
Yeah, Christine, you would just go up to the rooms icon at the top center of all of the apps.
Oh, yeah, I see it. Okay.
And
It
if you
says
click that,
executive
it
session, room 2.
It's
two.
room 2 for this one,
Okay,
room
great.
2.
Thank you. I guess that Tony's.
I think she's there. Okay, I'll keep watching for the other people who should be in there.
I'm gonna move. Let's see.
Karen, let us know when we're ready to go.
Everyone should be here. I'm just working on spotlighting the board members.
Okay, so I'm gonna, so we're back in public session. No action was taken in executive session on DV fiber. We're gonna make a motion and take action in public session. I just want to thank the DV fiber folks for coming back to the board with a much clearer presentation and identified the questions that we had at the last meeting and resolved many of the issues that were discussed. I'm going to put a motion on the table for consideration of the board. I'm going to make a motion that we amend DV Fiber's ARPA construction grant by redefining funding for 1,010 locations, which will be identified as BEAD funded locations that DV Fiber will pursue BEAD funding. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Just echo your earlier thanks for the additional clarity around what is happening here. It's unfortunate that we didn't have that to begin with. I appreciate everyone's work.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, all those in favor of the motion for DV Fiber, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously 4-0. Thank you all. Thank you, DV Fiber.
Yep, thank you, everybody.
Okay. All right, that brings us now to item 7, which is Northwest Fiberworks Act 71 construction grant application.
Yep, I'll turn that over to Alexi to take the lead.
Thanks. So again, similarly, we are going to again hear from Northwest Fiberworks on their ARPA grant application. There will be a short segment in public session to define what that request will be and some of the information about Northwest and others for the public. At that point, after that, we'll go into executive session to discuss the particulars of the business plan and the way that will all work. So MK, why don't you go ahead?
Thanks, Alexi. I'll make sure I get this up in the screen share.
Okay,
Can
we're
everybody
good.
see
You can
my
see it.
screen?
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mary Kay Raymond. I am the Network Operations Manager for Northwest Fiberworks, and I am here to represent the team today to explain what we are here applying for, our application phase 1 construction grant. First of all, we want to thank VCBB staff, especially Alexi on behalf of Northwest Fiberworks for being so helpful and available for our ARPA application. His dedication to the state broadband and the Northwest has been greatly appreciated. And Northwest Fiberworks is so excited to have a strong business plan that entails a strong ARPA network penetration model that can also support a strong BEAD application. Northwest Fiberworks CUD, our community mission, we were developed versus NWCUD, and we DBA as Northwest Fiberworks, or you will hear us called as NWFX, was officially formed on August 3rd, 2020. We are a municipal body consisting of representatives from Northwest Vermont for the purposes of building communication infrastructure. As of May of 2024, Northwest Fiberworks represents 22 communities in Franklin and Grand Isle County. And you can see the list below from the Grand Isles of Alberg to as far over as Montgomery. The mission of Northwest Fiberworks, as adopted by the Board of Representatives, is to leverage partnerships and procure funding to connect Northwestern Vermont with high-speed fiber to ensure opportunity for all the underserved homes and businesses in our region. Our commitments are universal access, to build access to every underserved premise in the district with the reliable broadband, provide access to affordable broadband service, and participate in the Affordable Connectivity Program or any future comparable programs. This infrastructure will also be built for tomorrow and provide a network sustainable for the next 50 years. Northwest Fiberworks made a recent organizational change as a team platform, in which reporting directly to the executive chair and community of the board. This currently maximizes on the existing experience of the employee skill sets and the chair and executive committees to support the needs of Northwest Fiberworks while using our funding to deploy our network. Currently, we have an executive committee that consists of 4 throughout our, they're voted for and elected yearly. And then we have community delegates with our existing and alternates so that they have someone to always be their voice of their community in each meeting. Here I am, I'm the network operations manager, and I come in with 29 years in telecom and inside plant, wireless, data managed services, and I've been based in New England. Brad Lewis is our business and finance manager, and Brad has 23 years experience in accounting and finance. He's worked at many levels across varied industries, including account manager, senior staff accountant, bookkeeper, and treasurer. And he brings extensive experience in all aspects of accounting for financial management. Our administration manager is Chastity Benjamin. Chastity has 12 years of experience in administration, and since joining NWFX has swiftly adapted and absorbed all things telecom related. The Northwest Fiberworks construction model is divided into phases. Today, we are submitting for our ARPA construction grant allocation funding of $20.2 million. Our phase 1 goals are to serve our region's most needed communities for broadband services, reach over 3,800 total underserved past premises, provide Northwest Fiberworks a sustainable and viable business model as a CUD, and establishes a strong financial model for future funding. With that, Alexi, I'm going to request that we move to an executive session, please, based on VSA S313, if that is okay with the board.
Okay, I will make a motion that we move to executive session to discuss the remaining part of Northwest Fiberworks construction grant application pursuant to 1 VSA section 313A1A, which protects information concerning contracts where premature general public knowledge would clearly place the public body or persons involved at a substantial disadvantage. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Brian. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it 4-0. We'll move over to executive session.
Okay, from staff, we'll have again, Christina Sweet, Tony Clitheroe, Alexi, and myself.
Christine, I think you have to move yourself again.
Yep, going to room 3, I take it. Yep, here we go.
That's right, room 3.
Okay, let me know when we are ready to go.
Yeah, I think we're waiting on Laura. Oh, there's Laura. Okay,
Yeah,
we're
Laura's
good.
here. Okay, we are back in public session and no action was taken in executive session. We heard from Northwest Fiberworks in terms of some detailed proprietary information from them. Thank you very much for a great presentation. I'm going to put a motion on the table that we approve Northwest Fiberworks construction grant application in the amount of $20,200,000. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Laura. Is there further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Excellent. Any opposed? The ayes carry 4-0. Okay, thank you very much and congratulations, Northwest Fiberworks.
Thank you
Yeah, nice
very
job.
much.
Thank you, Mary Kay, for your hard work. Mary Kay worked
The
through
team,
weekends.
teams worked hard.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you all involved. Okay, so that brings us to item 8 on the agenda, which is Maple Broadband and Waitsfield, Champlain Valley Telecom and DV Fiber BEAD sub-recipient grant application.
Yeah, and Alexi's going to take this one in the absence of Rob.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. So similar to the prior grants that we have brought before you, we have a couple more. These are designed to, as a competitive program to support anyone who needs it, who wants to apply for BEAD funds. Today, we are looking at an application from Maple Broadband and DV Fiber. The Maple Broadband is for $69,800, and it will go to support efforts to submit a joint WCBT Maple application. And they'll be using that for all the many things that are required for the BEAD program, including some data work, optimizing designs that will help them reach off-grid in addition to the ARPA-funded on-grid, and drafting their application. Do you want to take these one at a time, Patty, or should I outline the segment?
Yeah, we'd like to take, we'll take motion or action on them one at a time.
Okay.
Alexi, so in the event we approve this, a grant request, and this is for BEAD funds, correct?
Correct. So this is a sort of sub-program that was set up using some of the BEAD funds. That's right.
Okay. So once we take action on it, what is the steps that follow relative to BEAD? Does BEAD have to approve this?
No, we have already received essentially the approval of the program, and so the sub decisions belong to us.
Okay. And in staff's review of Maple Broadband's request, does it check all the boxes that are necessary for the BEAD for the BEAD grant submission for this effort?
It does.
Okay. Any other questions, board?
No.
Right. I'm going to make a motion that we approve Maple Broadband's request for $69,800 for BEAD funds as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Laura. Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes carry 4-0. Congratulations, Maple. Okay, let's take up DV Fiber now.
So DV Fiber has applied for $150,000, significantly to support mapping and business plan development to prepare them for a BEAD bid, and a number of that will involve how to design the network in such a way that it maximizes the grant funds they already have as well as the BEAD funds.
Okay, and I'm gonna ask the same question. Does this application go in front of BEAD or any other deciding entities?
No.
Okay, and it, in terms of staff's review, did it check all the boxes necessary to receive the bid or receive the grant?
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Okay, I'm going to make a motion that we approve DV Fiber's request for 150,000 of BEAD funds as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dan. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the DV Fiber request, please say aye.
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 Thank you. Are there any opposed? The ayes carry 4-0. Congratulations, DV Fiber. Okay, that brings us to item 9 on the agenda, ARPA funds update.
Yeah, we're going to turn this over to Tom Malinowski to present, and then we can have a follow-up discussion on what we're presenting. What Tom's going to be presenting to you today is the current status of the funds. So we have a pretty solid knowledge of where the funds are and how much is available. This is a follow-up from a previous board meeting where you wanted to get more detail in terms of where the ARPA and actually where the ARPA funds are, and I'll turn it over to Tom at this point. Go ahead, Tom.
Good afternoon, VCBB. My name is Tom Malinowski. I am the financial manager for VCBB. So the title page on this, I'm not sharing my screen, sorry. Can everyone see that?
Yep, we're good.
All right, so the title page, I apologize, I kind of articulated it incorrectly a little bit. So we're not talking about ARPA capital today. We're mostly specifically focused on ARPA SFR, and more specifically the SFR is the allocations, amounts pending board review, and obligations. And to start off, I just want to clearly identify those terms so that we're just all on the same page on the terms and the terminology. So what I mean by the allocations is essentially what those are the things that we have reported and we have agreed upon with the federal government, so the U.S. Treasury. So when we do the reporting for the SFR reporting, there are certain project items we have, and there's certain amounts allocated to each of those projects, and that's something that we had already worked with the federal government on. So that's what that is. The amounts pending board review, those are the things that are within that allocation that is still pending board review. So still waiting on action from the board or other actions before it goes to the actual VCBB staff. So that's what that means. Obligations, we are defining obligations today as what the U.S. Treasury defines them as. And what the U.S. Treasury defines the obligation as, in shortest terms here, is a grant that's been signed by both VCBB and the CUD or anyone who we sub-granted out to, and it's been finalized and signed by all parties. So it's like set in stone. So that's what we consider as obligations. And we're also, during this presentation, looking to request a board recommendations in terms of the changes to some of the allocations. Any questions with anything we are looking to present today, this moment? Okay. The item we need to really be focusing on today is moving the remaining amount of allocations pending board review to obligated in terms of definition of the U.S. Treasury. The pie chart here on the left, it shows what has been obligated in definition of the U.S. Treasury and what's remaining to be obligated. And this amount here in the purple is the amount that's remaining.
So Tom, just to be clear, I want to see if I can reiterate this to make sure my understanding is correct. The section, the area in green is under contract, under agreement. It's papered, signed by both parties.
That is correct.
The discussion that we're having is the purple area, the 16 million.
That is correct.
And we're going to focus in on that 16 million because I assume that there is some of that still could be, it just hasn't been papered yet, but it has been agreed to. And there's some of it that we have not taken any action on.
The purple in this pie chart is what has been not papered yet. So it might have had some board decision on it. But when I looked at the numbers based on what's been pending board decision versus what's been actually obligated, there's really no difference. We have been caught up on all of our on our grants out. If that's what you're asking, we're pretty much caught up on all those.
There's nobody that's been promised funds. They just they have not executed their agreements. There's nobody out there in process.
As far as I understand, we're all caught up.
Okay.
From what I saw in the numbers. All right, so just to explain some of the information I have here on the right.
Tony has her hand up.
Yes, Tony.
Patty.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the EC Fiber grant agreement has not been finalized yet. That's all.
So I think we'll get there as part of our plan, but right now because we're talking about the SFR, we haven't gotten to the EC Fiber piece yet.
Yeah, I'll explain that in a moment here. I'm just explaining where we are at current state today. And this is currently before we made all these decisions to issue out money to people, because we just did the round of that just a moment ago during this meeting. Obviously, it's not in the board packet.
But for example, Tom, we just took action on Northwest Fiberworks. Where does that 20 million lie in these charts?
Well, if it's funded by ARPA, it would cut into this purple.
So we just took action on 20.2 million. I assume it would be in the green.
That would not be CPF.
Yeah.
So we're only talking about SFR today. So
yeah.
So anything that we have decided today on BEAD or CPF or anything else, we are not talking about that today, or at least not in this presentation.
Yeah,
we can get you information in the future about it, but
to clarify, if you look at SFR, you see in the red there, it must be obligated to a subrecipient by December 31st.
Mm-hmm.
The CPF has no requirement for obligation. So the reason we're focusing on SFR is because that we need to make sure is obligated. So what we're presenting to the board today is a plan on how to get that obligated. So any new grants will come out of CPF.
So the capital programs, CPF meaning capital programs are different than this pie chart.
Yes,
that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so just a little bit more explanation on this. So this is kind of an overall scope of all of the ARPA funds we have. So we have 245 million of ARPA funds. 150 of it is a fixed amount of ARPA allocation into the SFR, so the state fiscal recovery. So the 150 is a fixed amount. It can't increase or decrease, and I can't mix and match the two funding buckets together. So those are designated amounts that we've been given. So it's 150 million for ARPA SFR and 95 million for ARPA Capital Projects Fund. The difference between the two is with CPF, you only can do capital, whereas SFR, you can do some capital, and then you can also do, and obviously other general ARPA costs, essentially. So that's kind of how that works.
Okay.
Any more questions on this slide? Okay, this slide here articulates what's pending board review. The length of the bar is the full allocation as we have it right now. The yellow is what has been decided by the board. The purple is what's remaining. The number indicates the amount in the purple. And this is where we are currently at as of right now.
I have a question.
Yes.
Sorry, this is a macro question. And I'm not sure if it's for you, Thomas, or for Christine. What is the purpose of this review today?
The purpose of this is to get all of the remaining funds that need to be obligated to all the funds that we need to get obligated in SFR to be obligated in terms of the US Treasury, so we don't lose it. That's the whole idea of this.
And we have until December, right? And so this is prep for the board, is that right?
We do have, so in terms of US Treasury guidelines, we have until December, but I have next steps that I'll be presenting in like a slide or two with more specific guidance of what that means to us. I can jump to answer that right now if we really need to, or if we want to continue. It's all up to what you want to do.
If I might, Patty, I am going to have to hop off in the next 5 minutes or so. And
Okay.
I am not prepared to vote for any changes in the ARPA allocations or to do anything with any of the ARPA allocations today. And I've
Okay.
also heard some concerns from some of the CUDs that have obligations. So I would like to just say, I'm hoping that we're not voting on anything today.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Christine,
not correct.
Christine, was it your intent to ask for a vote today?
No, our intent is to educate the board. We need to get this done. When do we?
Perfect.
Well, maybe you should switch to the slide of the timeline when you've got Laura here and then come back.
Sure.
And I think that'll answer the question.
Actually, that's the next slide anyway, so we can go back to the third slide if we need to.
Okay.
Okay, so to answer the question specifically about the timeline, to meet the US Treasury timeline of December 31st, 2024, and this is articulated in bullet 2 for what it's worth. We'll need the grant request submitted by the CUDs no later than July 31st or the end of July. And this will give us enough time for VCBB staff to process grants and to also ensure that we're in compliant with any internal due dates, so that this funding would not get moved under us.
Yeah, I actually don't think you need to go back to the past slide. You're hitting it here.
So
This is really helpful.
I would like to spend some time on this slide number 4 because I don't understand what's being proposed here.
Sure. So I can explain what we're suggesting. So since we have roughly about 16 million left, our suggestion to the board is that we take the 13.2 million construction grant that's been set to be funded by capital funds to be moved for SFR, and this is specific to EC Fiber. So there's an EC Fiber board approval already for this amount, but we haven't drafted any grants or any kind of legal paperwork on this yet. So what we're hoping to do is switch the funding source to SFR. And then when we do that, we will make the remaining amount for EC Fiber 0. And then we'll make the remaining amount for NEK 16.4 thousand. And in order to do that transaction, I mean, we would have to reduce the current allocation amount to NEK as it is right now. So that big purple for NEK would be reduced, because even though we move it from CB or CPF, we would have to also we have to switch it around the allocations in the SFR, because as I mentioned in slide 2, the 150 in SFR is a fixed amount, and the 95 million for CPF is also fixed. So it's not like you can, increase the SFR by like 162 or I think it was like 163.2 million. You can't do that. That's not how that works. So
yeah, and to explain this.
So this is pretty confusing to me. My number one question is, if you're moving funds from capital over to the state fiscal recovery SFR and reallocating dollars this way, does that leave any CUD short? I'm concerned about repurposing here and leaving somebody short.
So we're not necessarily moving the funds. Maybe a better way to explain is we're moving the projects from CPF to SFR. So essentially, we're taking the project that we're saying that we're going to fund by CPF. We're taking the CPF funding off of it, putting the SFR on it. So the project that we've approved already that's worth the 13.2 million, that project amount, we're just reallocating to SFR instead of.
But what happens to Northeast Kingdoms? They have almost 13, they have 12.6 million available to them in the SFR category that you're essentially repurposing for EC fiber.
Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop to the previous slide. I tend to be a little bit of a visual person. Maybe this might help people out. So essentially, everyone can see my mouse, right?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Patty.
Yes.
I have to leave. And so I would just ask that the board not vote on this.
There's no action being proposed, but I want to understand what their thinking is.
Thank you very much. I apologize. And great presentations today. Appreciate them all. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Safe travels.
Okay, so on this slide, you all can see my mouse, right?
Let the record know Laura left the meeting at 2:44. Thank you.
Okay, everyone can see my mouse? Okay, all right. So essentially what's going to end up happening is, although we move the stuff from CPF, we have to reduce the allocations here because, as I mentioned, I can't just change the allocations in the CPF, reduce it. So reduce 95 million by 13.2 million, and then increase SFR by 13.2 million. That wouldn't help solve what we're trying to do. So we're not doing that. What we're doing is we're taking the program that we originally allocated by CPF. So essentially, we're going to increase the allocations in the CPF again. So when it would increase the current allocations that would be available in the CPF by doing this. So by moving that over to here, we would reduce this purple. Like there would be like a small amount of purple left, but the allocation would also be, so the bar would shorten and the amount of purple left would be small. So
Tom, the question I'm trying to ask is a bigger picture question. It's not just the SFR accounts. Does NEK get shorted out of this? Do they lose funding opportunity in the whole ARPA availability of ARPA buckets for them to draw from?
Not necessarily. We could just move this purple, we can move it over to CPF, what we would have funded to EC fiber.
And have you talked to the other CUDs, specifically NEK and others, about if you did this, the ramifications to them? And are they in support?
I haven't spoken personally to them. I don't know I think that we have the VC, if someone wants from.
This might be a good time. I will maybe suggest that Rob, who I think was able to join for a minute, hop on or has hopped on to speak to that. But I think the bottom line that we want to share is that the allocations to individual CEDs aren't changing, but we are moving around which buckets of funds, particular grants or parts of grants will come from, so that we can use up all of this SFR funding sooner than the CPF funding. But Rob can probably speak to this as well.
Before Rob goes, I'd just like to ask a quick question, if I may, Patty.
Go ahead, Dan.
Is this a back-end financial management issue and not actually taking money from anyone?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, exactly, Dan. You hit it on the nail right there. This is just moving money around between two different funding sources. Since the beginning, we've been just talking about ARPA funds and not differentiating between the two, and I think that has caused some confusion. So this is just moving money between the two. No one is getting shorted. Everybody is getting the same amount of funds. Their allocations will be met. It's just changing the sources in some cases. We have not sought formal approval from VACUDA on this. We did discuss it at the last VACUDA meeting. I do not believe NEK was present at that meeting, but we are confident we can work out any problems. It shouldn't change anything, even in terms of reporting. We just want to make sure there's not some nuance that we're missing, since there's so many different overlapping federal programs. But
That's-
every CUD will certainly get what they need.
Okay, that's very helpful. But it still bears, it's worthy of checking in with all the CUDs on this, because if you're moving my allocation over to a bucket that's restricted to capital projects, and I wanted to count on some money to do, I'm just making something up, some study that's not capital, that you could pinch somebody here by doing this move. So this is important that we are transparent and make sure the CUDs are aware of the proposal and get their feedback.
Sure, we're happy to do that going forward. Luckily, we're planning pretty far in advance right now, so we have plenty of time.
Excellent.
Patty, can I ask if the federal agencies that are issuing these funds were to ever do an audit on this, would we have any risk there? Would they smile on this? Would they frown on this? Do we have any idea how they might react to this?
It's a good question.
Yeah, Christina, can you answer that question?
Yeah, my understanding is that we are talking about unobligated funds right now. So once we have a grant agreement signed with a CUD as our grantee, that is when the federal government will start reporting on that set of funds to the federal government, because so there really isn't really any paper trail that we're reporting on until we have that grant agreement.
Yeah, but
right now we are continuing to report on those funds as unobligated to the
But
US Treasury.
But we've changed our practice, right? We've changed the norm. Yes, we have. Have we not? We've changed the norm, what we've been doing for the last 2 years, right? And
Well,
so
I haven't been here for 2 years, so maybe I'll pass that one off to Rob.
Yeah, I think the proposal is to change it.
No, I know. And so that's my question is do we have good justification for changing it other than just trying to get the funds used up? And if we don't, how will that be viewed by any federal agency that might come back and do an audit? I'm just trying to understand risk here.
Good question.
I think I can answer that question. So I think from what I understand with working with individuals with the federal government, and also, so when I do this reporting, I actually report through agency administration who have direct contact with the Treasury. For the capital projects, I actually talk to the capital projects representative directly. So generally how it works is that they want to have these funds spent. So that's how that works out. The allocation piece, it can change, and it has changed actually a couple different times. When I was saying in the beginning of the presentation, the allocation, and as I was defining in here, is something that we agree with the federal government. So if the federal government's agreeing with us in terms of what we're allocating in terms of the project, then we should be fine because they're agreeing to it. And the biggest piece for us is the obligation piece. So like once it's obligated, we can't be playing games with moving it around. Yes, Rob, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to note that our proposal, both for the CPF and the SFR, that was approved by Guidehouse and by the feds, were exactly the same. It was the same grant program. Where we've been pulling the funds from has been our decision in terms of which CUD is getting which funds. Originally, we had tried to keep each individual CUD or other Act 71 applicant to the same funding source to ease reporting. That does not seem to be an issue anymore. And with the change in some of the final rule with the SFR and the fact that for the capital projects that we don't even need to obligate them before the end of this year, that's why this seemed like a wise decision. But it's nothing that the feds would have any issues with. That's my opinion, but it's what they know right now is just what we've reported. So it won't matter. We're not commingling necessarily, is what I could the best way to put it.
Would anyone else feel more comfortable if we had? I mean, is there any downside to getting a reaction from the feds as to a change in practice, or is that overkill?
We already did speak with a capital project fund to make sure we had some questions about match. They had no issue with this because anything we were going to do, whether it was for match or for broadband, it was all going to be in the same funding category. But we can certainly reach out again.
Yeah, I'm guessing we can get a letter out of Guidehouse Yeah, and again, we're not looking for a vote today. This is an informational discussion. So if I'm certainly happy to get a letter from Guidehouse.
Okay.
Or just, whoever the entity is that would be appropriate just to oversee this and do a second look check to make sure we haven't missed anything. I don't want to fall into any sort of gap ruling issue.
Yep, we will do that.
Okay.
Okay, so
And
the last thing I
also-
wanted to
And also
present on
definitely
this
run this through VCUDA to make sure CUDs understand it. And I would like their reaction on this.
Yes, we will do that as well.
Thank you, Christine.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, I will continue. So the last thing I want to present on the slide is if we were to move this 13.2 million EC fiber or the 13.2 million allocation to EC fiber, it will leave about roughly 3 million in SFR remaining to be decided among the board. And I have a breakdown of what that kind of looks like on the next slide. So today, this is where we're at. This is the pie graph that was on slide 2. If we make the move from NEK to EC fiber, this is how much you would have left, and this is how much smaller that purple section gets. This is providing that you agree upon it and we get the grant signed by all parties, right? Because that's what the definition of obligated and the remaining amount to be obligated is, right? Because that's what we talked about in the beginning of the slide. And this right here, this last pie chart is the remaining 3.1 million. And then that's based on the current allocations after this move to EC fiber.
So can you talk through the use of the 3.121 million?
Sure. So we have the Southern Vermont CUD, they're remaining about 695,000 left. DV Fiber has 11,000 left. Lamoille about 313 million left. NEK would have 16.4 as we described last slide. NWFX would have 399,000 left. Otter Creek would have about 559,000 left. And then we originally had this amount in admin costs. We haven't spent that much in admin costs yet, not an exorbitant amount, but it would be also used as kind of a buffer if we needed to have a buffer.
Yeah, and on the admin costs, one of the things we've learned last week, so the admin costs, we again, when we bring this to a formal proposal, we may free those up because we're actually, initial information I received last week, Thursday, was that we will get an additional about between 500 and 600,000 a year in USF funds. We just need to confirm that the governor needs to sign it. That's H657. And if that's the case, then that frees up those admin costs.
Okay.
So in other words, you're looking at, another possible 1.2 million available. But what we're saying here in the end is, after all is said and done, and the allocations are made, we've got about 3.12 million left over. That gets to that issue of question of how much funds are we going to have left over to be able to allocate to other purposes.
And just to reiterate, the SFR bucket can be used by the CUDs for capital expenditures. That's a question.
Yes, it's like the all-encompassing fund box, and the capital fund box is only for capital projects.
Because we would want to see every CUD run back in and chase these dollars down and get them papered so that we spend the money.
Yes.
That is the goal.
Okay, that's helpful.
And the other thing I wanted to, why we're also sharing this pie chart with all the allocations, that's as of right now. If we wanted to decide to divvy up the pie chart differently, we could always do that too. But that's based on the current allocations at this moment.
Yep, the 1.1 admin costs are definitely in play here.
Yeah, we've been encouraging CUDs that we talk to or other applicants to come into the board for additional amendments requests. So they have SFR funds remaining right now that those could be put into one of the various pots or a combined pot.
Okay.
We want to know if they're not going to use it, and if they're going to use it, we want to know what they're going to use it for.
All right, are there any other questions of the board? Christine, do you have a goal to take action on this by a certain date?
Yeah, we'd like to come in at the June meeting with a recommendation, and that's when we look for a board approval. But and at that point, we'll have nailed down officially what we're getting for USF, and so we can come in with a recommendation in June.
Okay. And by then you will have checked those boxes of the other questions that we had.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
All right,
Is there anything else on the ARPA fund update? Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you all for working on this for us.
No problem.
Tony, do you have something?
Yes. I just wanted to say that with respect to particularly the CUD allocation portion of the unobligated funds, which are roughly $2 million. We were hoping to get board approval to break down the walls, so to speak, within each allocation between materials, pre-construction, and construction, just to simplify and expedite the process of writing all of the construction grant amendments that we expect will need to be done in short order. And there's just an extra set of hurdles for each CUD that we were hoping to get the board's approval, not to have to, a blanket approval for that, to kind of break down those buckets. Each CUD has their allocation, their total allocation, and then we can process grant amendments for their construction grants.
So you're hoping to do that in
the
the June meeting, correct?
We're hoping to come to you in June with proposals for the grant programs to spend those additional dollars. So we're going to reach out to the CUDs promptly after this meeting to find out whether or not any of the CUDs are going to send their money back to the VCBB, or whether they want to apply for additional funding to use up their allocations. And once we have that information, we are going to come to the board next month with hopefully more than one proposal for how to use those funds. But not having to come for an amendment to change pre-construction to construction or materials to construction is just going to, eliminate a lot of stumbling blocks and time that frankly we don't really have right now.
Okay, but in other words, Tony, your proposal will be part of the June discussion for action. You're not asking for that right now.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, anything else on number 9, ARPA funding update? Okay, let's move on to Bikuda update.
Hello all, how are you? So I have 4 things today on my list. A little update on the CCI docket and the PUC, the affordability proposal, the details of the ARPA allocations, and then just a couple quick updates on positive things that are going on. So first of all, on the CCI docket, this is really outside your scope, but just wanted you to be aware that the CUDs did file to intervene. And in fact, in kind of a curious thing, the department joined together the individual applications of the various CUDs and asked us to speak as one before them, which actually, will work out okay, but is a little bit difficult because some of the interests of the CUDs related to CCI are slightly different. But at a high level, what we're asking for is some clarity on commitment to contractual obligations that, so CCI is being acquired by a private firm and being taken private. And so the docket is the department's opportunity to review that. We're asking for three basic things. A commitment to the contractual obligations that have been made by the predecessor company as it's taken private. Continued attention to make ready. As you know, Green Mountain Power has a lot of the poles in the state, and other electric co-ops have other poles, but there are a small number that CCI controls. And if those happen to be along a pole line that we need, it's very important that we understand how those are going to be dealt with. And then the last one is the private company is making a commitment to invest in CCI as it takes it over. And we're just kind of asking for some clarity of where that investment might be made, if any of it's coming to Vermont. And for anti-competitive reasons, you can imagine that we don't expect them to tell us that, but we're asking the department to have a clear view of the investment plan and to be able to share it with the VCBB as you all try to figure out what universal service looks like. I think the second thing is we sent a letter to you asking for your collaboration on a different direction on the affordability proposal that has been proposed as a VCBB policy. And I think the individual CUD members felt strongly enough about this that they wanted to actually meet with the VCBB board members and kind of talk through it and have an opportunity to discuss that with you. But at a high level, the most important things to know are that the other policies you all have considered are very much within the scope of the relationship of the VCBB and the grantee. We feel that the affordability policy, because it includes third parties, both in terms of people that can provide data, recipients, and others, really has a much broader set of interested parties and stakeholders that need to be involved in it, and that we and you together are not the only ones that can solve this problem. We need to bring more people to the table, and that there are many unknowns about the outcomes and how all that would fit together. So our proposal is to take advantage of what Act 71 says in 8084A6F, which says we have the power to develop policies or make proposals to the legislature. That we would like to work with you to come up with a policy and bring the other stakeholders to the table, including the other people that are part of putting together an effective affordability policy, and come to get up with a proposal by the fall that we can take to the legislature in January. And so that is what we would like to do with that. I know a couple of you have met with interested parties on this, and we would like to continue those conversations and have an opportunity to talk to you about a broader approach to the affordability issue than just the policy. The next one was related to ARPA and the conversation that you just had. And in this one, again, it's about defining future clarity for CUDs that are planning 18 to 24 months out and how they get to universal service in their district, which is a very important topic for all sorts of reasons. The shifting of funds between fund sources does have some implications for folks that were planning to not do all capital out of those funds, or that were planning to do all capital out of those funds. And similarly, maximizing every single dollar they can to have available for solving problems that BEAD applications won't solve is a really important part of planning for the next 18 months. So not only understanding where we are on SFR, which has to be obligated by the end of this year, but for us, getting CPF figured out too and fully allocated, not by the end of the year, ideally in the next couple months would be really ideal. And so there's a little bit of just coordination here that needs to happen, but we're feeling a different pressure to understand the whole picture and to do that as quickly as possible. and to clear up some of these language and other kinds of activities, and to have a process for if we do decide that there's 3 million or it's only 1.8 or it's when we get in through CPF there's more available. Understand what that process is going to be, how quickly that process can be run to get to awards, so that ideally by September or October, the CUDs would have certainty on not only SFR, but also on CPF, so that they can plan their next 18 to 24 months based on knowing what those allocations are. Does that make sense? Okay. Then the last one was just other news and updates. We have been working on the Digital Equity Competitive Program, the $1.25 billion national program, to try to talk to stakeholders about what a Vermont program might look like. Deb Shannon's been working with Vicuda on that. Clearly, it is not a Vicuda-led coalition long term, but we've been trying to kind of instigate the coalition building that would be necessary for a proposal to be put together, and are going to continue to do that and find out whether or not, in fact, there is a coalition of the willing, able that want to apply for that digital competitive program. That, as the team said earlier, the state can't lead that one. An outside group has to come together to make something happen there if we're going to apply. So we've been working on that, and we hope to have some more progress on that. I believe I have it right that CV Fiber announced last week they had their 250th customer, which is great. Lisa told me that Lamoille is starting construction today. And there are a number of other good things going on as summer construction season gets well underway. I think that's it for me for today, unless there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Rob. Everyone's busy.
A lot going on.
Very, very busy. Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, any questions of Rob? Okay, let's move to public comment. You're on mute, Christine.
If for public comment, please raise your hand if you'd like to be recognized, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. And Irv, you've got your hand up, so take it away.
Thank you. Obviously, I'm responding to what I've heard in this meeting, and I haven't discussed this with other folks in EC Fiber, so I'm just speaking for myself at this point. I have a couple of comments about the reallocation of having the EC Fiber allocation come out of SFR instead of CVF. It doesn't, on the face of it, make much difference, I would think, to us. It makes a virtue out of the unfortunate fact that the board approved that grant in principle late last summer, and the grant agreement is still not written up. But I also heard you say that you may be receiving some additional money that would offset your need to draw administrative funds out of this SFR remaining funding. Given that ACP has still not been reallocated, as far as I'm aware, I'd like to be wrong about that, and I'd be cheerfully glad to be corrected. But assuming that it is still stuck in political limbo, I'd like to suggest that the board consider something quite different. Given that capital funds can't be used except for capital, but SFR can, if you're finding yourselves with excess money in SFR, instead of parceling it out in little crumbs and pieces to all of the CUDs, consider trying to implement a 1-year extension of ACP within the state of Vermont, which so badly need, whose low-income residents all over the state so badly need it. And I'd love to hear, if that's an impractical suggestion, why it is. Thank you.
Any other comments from public? Krista, go ahead.
Hi. So I actually took a vacation, so I was away until Thursday of last week, and I really didn't. I did review the slide deck on Friday, but I really didn't understand it. So I will work with the staff to help identify and discuss and potentially find win-win collaborative solutions to but there are differences between the two funding categories, and they would have significant impacts. So I just did want to identify that. I think that switching completely different topics, the digital equity piece is really important. And for those, listening from various entities, other providers, et cetera, we want this to be a Vermont statewide coalition. We don't want this to be a CUD application, but a statewide application. And so I would encourage, reach outs to us to help bring everybody together on that. So anybody that's connected to people who can have an impact, the more we can bring into the state on digital equity, it's super critically important. And the last thing I want to say is that I know that we have the largest outstanding unobligated amount, and we have delayed the application for those remaining funds for a good reason. And we do anticipate having that grant amendment in to the staff for the initial review by the end of June. So I just want to assure you that that is all strategically planned. We do have those intentions, and we look forward to working with the staff to get a better understanding of how things get allocated. Thank you.
Okay, FX, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I would like to say that I don't support Irv's suggestion that the $16 million be put into extending ACP in the state. Frankly, I would like that some of that money to be put into what's available for EC Fiber to build out its network, because that will have the best, longest term ability to reduce the cost of internet services in our district going forward, given the fact that we've already borrowed $70 million. And if you don't put it in, we're going to be having to borrow $80 million. I've gone over this with staff. I've gone over it with the board. We have never really had a chance to have a robust discussion with the board about this. I would like to ask for a special meeting of the board in 2 weeks, just with the EC Fiber Executive Board and the members of the VCBB board to go over this. I'd also like to announce that EC Fiber, DV Fiber, EC Fiber, EC Fiber, DV Fiber, CV Fiber, NEK Broadband, and Maple are all ISPs that uniquely responded to the request by supporters of the ACP legislation to extend benefits for the month of May while Congress sorts out the ACP funding. We got a lot of press, particularly within the industry, lauding us for that, and got a lot of attention in Washington as well. Thank you.
Thank you, FX. Lisa, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to echo Rob BT's comments regarding the need to plan for both the state and local fiscal recovery funds and the capital projects. And when he talks about the 18 months, that means spending them within the next 18 months. The commitments and obligations are basically for some CUDs maybe on the same timetable as the SLRFA funds. So BCUDA has been working on a proposal and is happy to work with staff to get you something for your June meeting. And as Krista said, we, as always, want it to be a win-win. So thank you.
Thank you. Krista, go ahead.
Hi. One quick additional item. It would be extremely helpful if there was a special meeting that occurred in May, so that we could provide updates and reviews to the board that, for timing reasons relative to BEAD, need to occur at the end of May. So if you would consider, for a second reason, a special meeting by May 30th, that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Irv, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify. I was not referring to 16 million to be allocated to statewide ACP. I was referring to a piece of that 3 million that's currently in your pie chart as potentially unallocated of the SFF funds, and suggesting that if you're getting a couple of slugs of 600,000, that you might consider using some of that for ACP-like purposes rather than for administrative costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have comments to make? Raise your hand. Okay, I think we're done with public comment.
Okay, thank you very much all. Let's now move on to item 12, parking lot and scheduling special May meeting. Christine, you want to tee us up?
Yeah, we were looking at a special, you've heard some requests for additional information on a special meeting, May meeting. We were actually looking at possibly holding that special May meeting the first week of June, but we wanted to dedicate that to budget and focus on the budget and status of where we are. We're fine with the digital equity capacity grant. We're now ready to put this all together in a single budget and propose to the board for what 2025 would look like. So, with special meeting to talk about the budget and anything else that the board would like to discuss. But we wanted to, I suppose it could be the last week of May, but we were hoping to shoot for the first week of June.
I'm gonna put out there that I would really like to stick to once a month. It is a significant time commitment for all the board members, to attend meetings, take time out of their schedules. It's difficult even for our regular meeting to get all 5 of us together. So I'm really going to discourage having a special meeting unless it's an absolute must. And I'm not seeing this as an absolute must personally. I don't know if any other board members have thoughts. Dan or Brian?
I agree.
Thank you.
Okay.
We need to run the meetings. I mean, we had a very full meeting today and we're getting through it and we're going to be done before 4.
Yep, I agree. Very productive meeting. Thank you.
Okay. So let's hit the parking lot.
Yeah, I'll pull the parking lot up. There's a lot of items on the parking lot. They're fresh, so don't get nervous. But I'll quickly review them. These are from the last 3 meetings. We'll pick up some more, but we haven't. Some of these we can consolidate into one. But let me go through it quickly. And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. First one, change the lien policy to recoupment policy. That's a name change. Tony's going to take that one. Board would like an update. We'll provide that on the Ookla reporting project. Board members would like a statement from CTC. We've done that in this meeting, so we close that one out, number 66. Develop a plan B for the ARPA money. That is exactly what we just talked about, and we'll finalize that in June. Conditional approval of ARPA funds, the match application under, this is tied, I think 65 and 64 are the same, so we'll tie those together. Update from the digital equity escrow. What other states are planning to do about affordability now at the ACP? We'll present that in the July meeting. Create a cost referencing. That was included your board packet. We included a cross-referencing table. Oh, maybe that's not it. Create a cross-referencing between the reporting requirement under the construction standard policy on reporting. No, we haven't done that yet. Create a policy on reporting. So the reporting requirements were included in your May 13th packet. And that'll be followed up with a policy. Prepare a memo that addresses a conflict if one arises between the board policies and the pre-existing grant agreement. That's Tony. Prepare a memo explaining that they intend the board policies applied to grant holders over and above whatever standards are applied by the FCC. That's Tony. Act 71 and B differential list. That's Tony. Cumulative dashboard for the grants. We already have that. That's the link is in there. Updated information is the ARPA funds reporting. That's what we did at this meeting. We included the reporting policy in this packet. We included the cross-reference table with definitions in this packet. Is Ookla data sold to third parties? The answer is yes. There's no. Tony can explain that one. Tony, you want to say a little about that?
Yeah, just I think most of the board members, I think, understood that there is no way you can opt out once you sign up for internet service. They're different providers, but Ookla certainly, it requires the data to test the speed. So the horse is kind of out of the barn on that from a privacy perspective, Patty. And we tried to address your concerns about the third-party data mining, and there's really nothing we could do. So we stepped back from it, and we did not enter a contract with Ookla. Instead, one of our consultants is managing a contract with Ookla, and we are working with the consultant to try to make sure that the members of the public in Vermont are aware of the fact that, when they get the internet service and sign up, that it's anonymized data, but the fact that they have service and what the speed is and all of that, as I said, the horse is out of the barn. That's public. That information is out there. And we couldn't protect it with the Title 348 because Ookla is not an ISP.
Application scoring criteria policy, that'll be approved as volume 2, or when volume 2 gets approved. And then the last two are related to the accountability policies. So as you can see, a lot's been added to the list. We'll provide commitment dates in the next list from the, we finished that, we got all this from the last board meeting minutes. And Krista has her hand up.
Okay, that's a really it's helpful to see the new meeting minutes with the action items at the end, and hopefully all of those have been swept in here. We've got that's it's a good accounting of the things we have left on our plate from prior discussions. So thank you for that. Christine, I don't want to open this up to public comment. That's public comment is designed in the period and the slot that it was intended. So let's not open the parking lot up for additional public comment.
Okay.
Anybody have anything that they want to reach out?
It's not a comment. I'm just I would like to ask, since you have 30 minutes left in this meeting and you're all together and you're not willing to have a meeting before the end of May, I would just ask for 5 minutes of your time to get your advice on the process that I take to make sure that it is okay with you. And it's pretty important. So I would just ask for an executive session, and I will, keep it brief, but I think it's important.
Patty, we still,
Go ahead, Dan.
sorry, we still need to, we don't have 30 minutes. We have less than that because we
Agreed.
still have executive items to take care of.
Yep, agreed.
Sorry.
And Krista, it has not been warned, so I'm going, unless it's an emergency, and I haven't heard you characterize it as an emergency, I'm going to push it to the June agenda.
I will communicate with the board by email then. I think it is. I think it is. So. Yep.
Okay, let's, we still have item 13 to go into an executive session for board matters. All right, so is there anything else on the parking lot or the special schedule? All right, let's leave that. Let's go now into item 13. I'm going to make a motion that we move into executive session per 1 VSA section 313A33, authorizing a public body to hold an executive session to consider personnel matters. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dan. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, we'll move over to executive session now.
Okay, so Tony, you're taking care of that?
Yes, it should be happening. Oh, wait, I don't know what's happening.
No, I think you got it.
This.
I think that
Rob
worked.
Beatsky is in this executive session.
Rob Beatsky should not, no, he's not in the executive session. He's in
I'm
our
still
meeting.
pinged here as a presenter. I'm just muted.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Tony, you'll have
Yeah,
to remove people from the last executive session, the room 2. You'll have to remove them from it, or they will join, or they will get any chat or anything that happens during it.
Okay. So I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do, Rob. Room 2, it says room 2 is closed. So.
Yeah, what do you mean, Rob?
Well, first, I can't help. I'm on my phone, as you know.
Well, none of your board members are in the room that you're in currently. This is the main room, so maybe you're just in the wrong room.
Then maybe they did go over, but other people may have been invited if they weren't removed from the list of attendees for executive committee.
Well, there's an executive session with 4 people in it right now, Rob. It's called executive session personnel, different than room 2 or 3.
Oh, okay. Then that's probably fine then, yeah.
Yep.
All right, so.
And I didn't get
before
there, so I'm not in it.
I
Don't
thought
worry
we
about
only
me.
had 3 board members,
Oh, that's right.
so I don't know who the 4th is. Oh, it's just for Laura. That's all. So we're good.
All right.
False alarm.
Yeah, I think we're good. Hey, I think we are not going to have a quorum, so I would tell you that whenever the board will not be coming back into the meeting. I'm sorry, we should have cleanly ended this, but the board meeting's officially over because we won't have a quorum. So thank you, everybody. Sorry to leave you hanging.
Thank you.
Yep, bye now.